This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
Na ganina mi arna, na mari na nari David, na arta yonki yaku, na kuntranti takani naichu wardli, na pulni na icha na wagani wara garna mi arna, mi pudlanti naichu kunyan tapati. What I just said, for those of you who don't understand Garna when spoken with an Irish accent, is, hello, my name is David, and while I'm not originally from this country, I'm very proud to call it my home, and I tell you this in the language of the Garna people as a sign of my respect. Our meeting tonight takes place on Garna land. Garna people have performed ceremonies on this land for many centuries, and we pay our respect to their living culture and the unique role they continue to play in the life of the Adelaide region. The Honourable Bob Hawke, former Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Zoe Beddison, Minister for Communities and Social Inclusion, Minister for Multicultural Affairs, Mr Jim McDowell, Chancellor of the University of South Australia, the Honourable Grace Portalese, Chair of the South Australian Multicultural and Ethnic Affairs Commission, and leaders of the various faith traditions, elders and community leaders, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. I'm especially pleased to welcome you on behalf of the University of South Australia to this, the launch of the Centre for Islamic Thought and Education, and to the inaugural lecture which will be delivered by its leader, Professor Mohammed Abdallah. The event tonight is jointly presented by the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre and the Centre for Islamic Thought and Education. Now, before we begin, and I often put this in my one to remind me, please switch off your phones, because I don't know about you, but mine is a fairly incessant ring and it tends to ruin the podcasts, and we are recording tonight's lecture for the future. If all you did these days was read newspapers and watch TV, you could be forgiven for believing that Islam is at war with the West. Almost every day, media serves up some new atrocity which pits Muslims against non-Muslims and puts Australian values to the sword and threatens the tenets of Western civilisation. Events post 9/11, 2001, the rise of radical Islam and violent extremism of its proponents have successfully created a them and us divide that is not only terribly destructive, but ignores centuries of fruitful interaction between the them and us. This, after all, is not only one of the world's greatest religions, is also one of the world's great cultural institutions. One which places great value on education and emphasises the importance of acquiring knowledge. As both a religion and a cultural institution, its so-called golden age between the 8th and 13th centuries, Islam advanced and increased the world's knowledge of philosophy and science, mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, engineering, social sciences, healthcare, culture, commerce, architecture and education. And there's a certain elegant symmetry that sees the promotion of understanding of an old and established religious and cultural institution being hosted by one of the world's youngest and best universities. According to no less a source than the Guinness Book of Records, which comes from a very good brand, the University of El Qarawiyyin in Morocco was founded in 859 and is the world's oldest degree-granting institution, whereas we turned 25 just this year. Now, as a university, irrespective of our age, we have an obligation to help extend the depth and breadth of human understanding, and we cannot confine people who think alike and share similar histories. We have to be expansive and inclusive. Many of us have been subjected to distrust or to sectarianism of one kind or another. This very Australian institution is headed by an unlikely combination of a Chancellor and Vice-Chancellor, Jim McDowell and myself, who were raised on opposite sides of Irish traditions, and for centuries those traditions propagated conflict between Catholics and Protestants. Were it not for our determined parents, good education, and most importantly, understanding across communities, we both could have lived very different lives. So we view the creation of the Centre for Islamic Thought and Education as an opportunity to use education to help steer a better understanding between, in this case, Muslim and non-Muslim communities. And welcoming Professor Mohammed Abdallah and his academic colleagues to the University of South Australia, we're playing an active role in building understanding and awareness of Islam and empowering the community, both them and us, through research, education and engagement. The Centre for Islamic Thought and Education at the University of South Australia will be a global knowledge hub which focuses on genuine and meaningful engagement between the Muslim and non-Muslim communities. It will help to develop meaningful two-way conversations and insights so that us and them becomes all of us. The Centre will bring together academics specialising in Islamic civilisation, psychology, ethics, leadership, management, sociology, finance and education. Crucially, the staff for the Centre for Islamic Thought and Education have extensive community experience that will allow for genuine and grounded engagement. And at the very heart of the Centre's philosophy is our university's deep conviction that academic research and teaching can only positively impact on our engagement with the community, with media, with government and non-government organisations. Professor Abdallah, as many of you already know, is an expert on Islamic civilization and how it connects with Western civilization. It's that interconnectedness that he will talk about tonight, drawing lessons from the interactions between Islamic civilization, Greek and Western civilizations, and the impact they have on one another. The British Pakistani novelist Nadeem Aslam said it best in his novel, The Wasted Vigil. Pull a thread here and you'll find it's attached to the rest of the world. We have so very much to learn from and with each other that any divide that separates Islam and the West is a threat. It undermines the interconnectedness of Islamic civilization and its Western counterpart. And it's that interconnectedness and connecting that we must focus on. We have much that we share with the Islamic community, and there are so many opportunities for us to raise awareness and drive engagement with the wider community. And in the spirit of beginning to share our narratives, I ask that you would join me in welcoming one of Australia's most prominent and respected Muslim leaders, who is at the same time an academic, a scholar, a public intellectual, a religious leader, and a commentator. A man who established Islamic studies as a discipline at Griffith University, where he was the founding director of the Griffith University Islamic Research Unit. A man who was the director of the Queensland node of the National Centre for Excellence in Islamic Studies, and a man who has, over the years, held many distinguished community roles and received multiple civic awards. It is my great pleasure tonight to welcome Professor Mohammed Abdallah to the University of South Australia, and to what I know will be an important part of the interfaith peace process.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. I'm not cursing you. This is an opening prayer that we make before we start. And although an acknowledgement to country has been given, I also would like to acknowledge the Karna people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend the respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander who is present here. Respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I am at the outset humbled to be standing here before you, but I have to make a confession at the outset. We don't make confessions in Islam, but I will make one tonight. The confession is when I was asked that we should have a launch of the center, and I agreed to the idea. I thought we will have 50 people turn up, but we have about 500 tonight, so it's a bit overwhelming. So I did ask, where is the emergency exit? But no, I hope I will stay for the remaining of the night. May I express my gratitude to you all for paying me the compliment of attending tonight. My friends, I want to begin by telling a story. In the early 8th century, the Abbasid Caliph Mamoon, who was the grand ruler of the Islamic world centered in Baghdad at the time, supposedly saw a dream, and in his dream saw none other than Aristotle. And in his dream he had an interesting discussion with the great Greek philosopher Aristotle, in which he was asking him as to whether there is a conflict between reason and revelation, as to whether there is a conflict between intellect and revelation. And the answer that Aristotle gave was no, there should not be a conflict between reason and revelation. And though the historical accuracy of this dream may not be certain, or it could be doubtful, nevertheless, it is said that Al-Mamoon was so inspired that as early as the beginning of the 8th century went on to establish perhaps the first international institute of science known as Bayt al-Hikmah in Arabic, or the House of Wisdom. In doing so, he went to establish a House of Wisdom or Institute of Science for the study of the Word of God and the work of God, the rational and the metaphysical. And in this institute, he brought along the Muslims and the non-Muslims, he brought Christians and Jews and people of all and from all diverse faith traditions. In fact, in his award-winning book, God's Crucible, Islam and the Making of Europe, David Lewis says that this House of Wisdom was an imposing name given to one of mankind's most fecund periods of cross-cultural, intellectual, and scientific productions. Now, the uniqueness of the House of Wisdom is that it was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious institution funded, mind you, by the state and various other philanthropists and bureaucrats for the pursuit of knowledge. Though this institution advanced the study of science, or through this institution, the study of science and philosophy and medicine and astronomy was advanced, but also a host of other disciplines were advanced in that institution. For example, Yaqub ibn Ishaq al-Kindi was a star of the House of Wisdom and held the view that no conflict existed between the work of God and the Word of God. In other words, they should not be really a contradiction nor a conflict between reason or the intellect or rationality and revelation or the metaphysical reality. And indeed, this became a core feature of Islamic civilization, and that is why when we speak about religion and science from an Islamic perspective or from within an Islamic civilizational perspective, we don't speak about a conflict, because there was a harmony that was created between the intellect and revelation. In fact, in his treatise on the intellect, that's what he called it, this treatise of Al-Kindi flooded and perturbed the Christian West for 4 centuries later. And if you fast forward to the 14th century, one of the most misunderstood and perhaps known as one of the most conservative classical Muslim scholars called Ibn Taymiyyah also argued for the impossibility of contradiction between revealed and rational knowledge, provided, he said, that both revealed and rational knowledge are sound and valid. He further argued that it is a false revelation and or false reasoning and rationalism that can lead to apparent contradictions between revealed and rational proofs. Inspired by Islam's emphasis on the importance and indeed virtue of knowledge, the early Islamic civilization underwent a systematic and a well-funded pursuit of knowledge, attempting at once to understand the Word of God and the work of God. Interestingly, classical Muslim scholars, and by extension the Islamic civilization, its Sunni and its Shia, did not divide knowledge into secular and sacred. This division was never there in the Islamic civilization, and indeed it is not in the psyche of a Muslim scholar to divide knowledge into the secular or the sacred. Rather, the Islamic civilization saw knowledge as one big circle, not 2 circles, and its sacredness, that is the sacredness of knowledge or otherwise, dependent on the intention of receiving it and the application of that knowledge. So instead of dividing knowledge into two spheres, Muslims categorize knowledge into what I would say a very intelligent categorization, and they categorize it into what we would say in Arabic fard ayn, or that which is individually compulsory on you as an individual, and fard kifaya, and that is where the entire community is responsible for that knowledge. That which is individually compulsory related mostly to the sphere of religious sciences. And so in order to know one's God and his attributes and his qualities and how to worship God, it is fundamental on each believer to acquire the necessary knowledge to worship God with clarity. And that is why this idea of blind faith is not necessarily accurate from an Islamic perspective. For if a Muslim adherent of Islam is to imitate in the acts of rituals, he or she must not imitate when it comes to belief in God. For that knowledge must be acquired. And the communal obligation was, and interestingly, it encompassed those types of or those sciences which were seen as secular or rational, such as the study of medicine or the pursuit of mathematics. For the rationale in the Islamic civilization was that if it leads to the benefit of society and the public interest, therefore it is sacred in itself. And so they moved away from this idea of mathematics being sacred, for example, and the study of the Quran being, the study of mathematics being secular and the study of the Quran being sacred. But rather they said it depends on the intent and the application. And that is why mathematics is neither sacred nor secular. The intention for its pursuit and indeed its application makes it one or the other. And because fundamental to the Islamic law, Sharia, and I often say when you say the S word, Sharia, people collapse. So the fundamental to Sharia is are the higher objectives, and one of the highest of objectives in Islamic sacred law is the preservation of life. Furthermore, Muslim scholars said not only is the preservation of life in itself a higher objective in Islam, but indeed anything that leads to the preservation of life becomes in itself a higher objective. In other words, if the study of medicine is considered one of the highest objectives of Islamic sacred law, also the construction or the building of institutions such as hospitals and the training of medical doctors become in itself a sacred duty and obligation on the community so as to advance the study of medicine, which leads to benefit of society and the community. And in terms of mathematics, algebra was used, for example, or mathematics generally, for the service of religion. In fact, because religion demanded certain calculations, whether in terms of the distribution of inheritance or the finding of the right direction to the Qibla or to the direction of prayer towards Mecca, the early Muslim scientists mastered mathematics, not only studied it from the Greeks, but mastered it, and soon you will hear about how they went and spent 300 years translating the works of the Greeks. So algebra was established in Baghdad and advanced as early as the beginning of the 8th century. Then basic algebra reached Spain from Baghdad sometime in the early 9th century. Now, Andalusians, or the people of Andalusia in Spain, both Muslims and non-Muslims, working together under the positive multicultural atmosphere of la convivencia, or the coexistence, assimilated the new knowledge in the sciences and humanities with an almost untroubled eagerness, thereby creating a basis of knowledge that would provide the foundation for the Renaissance in Christendom certain to come. In Toledo, the translation from Arabic into Latin was undertaken by Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Toledo experienced its remarkable, prodigious interfaith collaboration. These intellectual activities were welcomed, believe it or not, by Castell's King Alfonso VII, and encouraged, in fact, by Archbishop Raimondo, many of the finest Christians during their time, both and Muslims and Jews, intellectuals from these diverse faith traditions, assembled there in Toledo to interpret, debate, and translate. This work of interconnectedness delivered a volume of translated data that significantly lifted the culture level of the West. There also emerged, right from about the end of the 8th century till the 11th century, one of the most profound intellectual movements in the history of mankind. And that is the translation movement. And many people are unfamiliar with the translation movement that emerged in the Islamic civilization. The translation movement is yet another beautiful manifestation of the very idea of interconnectedness. But it also beautifully illustrates the greatness that can be achieved when people of diverse backgrounds work together for the common good of humanity, despite race, color, gender, or religious background. The translation movements, my friends, was a systematic, elaborate, sustained, and well-organized translation movement which brought almost all the philosophical and scientific books available in the Near East and the Byzantine Empire into Arabic. This movement, which lasted for almost 300 years of sustained and elaborate effort to translate the works of the Greeks and indeed the Persians and the Indians, it brought all these philosophical and scientific books in the Near East, and it lasted, as I said, for 300 years, where the works of some of the great figures, such as Aristotle, Ptolemy, Galen, and the likes, were not only translated, and that is a common myth that is propagated often in texts on the history of science, that the Islamic civilization only managed to translate and preserve the sciences of the Greeks. And it wasn't until Europe emerged from its darkness that they were able to edit and add to the texts of the Greeks. And that is a myth, and that can be easily debunked. For example, Al-Hajjaj bin Matar, who lived around the year 830, translated the two most advanced Greek scientific texts, Euclid's Elements and Ptolemy's Almagest or Almagest, in the year 829. The language of his translation was flawlessly good Arabic, technical terms and all. And the Arabic translation even corrects the mistakes of the original Greek text. To give you about some of the examples of some of the translators who were actively involved within the Islamic civilization, but who were not Muslims. Theodore Abu Qurra, who died in the year 826, was an Orthodox Christian. He was a disciple of John of Damascus, and he held a secretarial post under the Umayyad Caliph. Yuhanna ibn al-Bitriq, who died in the year 944, was an Assyrian Christian. Hunayn ibn Ishaq al-Abidi, who died in 877, was a Nestorian Christian. And MashaAllah ibn Athari, who died in 815, was a Jewish translator. All of those people, all of those great intellectuals worked together under one hegemony to advance the cause of humanity. Among many reasons, the very success, I believe, of the intellectual movement under the Islamic civilization was largely due to the presence of a cosmopolitan intellectual context, a multicultural context, which allowed Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Zoroastrians, and even atheists to work together to create a substantial intellectual tradition. And this was supported by an Islamic hegemony that was inspired by the Islamic faith to pursue and disseminate knowledge for the common good. Had the Muslims of that period had an attitude or behaved the way groups like ISIS or Boko Haram behave today, then they would have committed one of the greatest crimes, I would say, against humanity, and that is the destruction of the Greek legacy. Just imagine, we have groups like ISIS and Boko Haram who assume that anything that's coming from the West is problematic and has to be destroyed. And had the Muslims of the past developed this destructive and problematic mentality, then what would have happened to the Greek legacy? Luckily, this did not happen. Now, despite the clear theological differences that existed between the Islamic civilization and the Greek civilization, the Islamic civilization in this case, including its political and religious leaders to a great extent, did not destroy the ancient knowledge of the Greeks. Instead, the legacy of giants such as Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy was not only preserved, but became an impetus for significant intellectual movements in the Islamic world and indeed the Western worlds. So by the 13th century, Ibn Rushd, the great jurist known as Averroes, was recognized in the Western world as the commentator of Aristotle, contributing thereby to the rediscovery of the master, Aristotle, after centuries of near total oblivion in Western Europe. St. Thomas Aquinas, in fact, respectfully referred to Averroes simply as the commentator of Aristotle, and modeled his own writing style on the Cordovian Muslim summary elucidations. That discovery was instrumental in launching Latin scholasticism and, in due course, the European Renaissance of the 15th century. In other domains, interconnectedness was also witnessed. Ibn al-Haytham, al-Tusi, al-Urdi, and al-Shirazi refined the work of Ptolemy. The work of Ptolemy in astronomy remained the standard text, if you wish, for 1400 years. And it wasn't until the Muslim astronomers who for more than 400 years continued to work on the astronomy of Ptolemy to correct its errors and mistakes. They invented new mathematical models, and by the 14th century, a timekeeper in the Umayyad Mosque of Damascus, which has been destroyed, unfortunately, because of the civil war, he proposed a new model that now historians of astronomy tell us that Copernicus, Nicholas Copernicus, may have benefited tremendously. In fact, they say it is not whether, but it is when and how Copernicus benefited from these Muslim astronomers, eventually influencing the heliocentric conclusions of Nicholas Copernicus. Emily Savage Smith, one of the leading historians of medieval Islamic medicine, argues it was through Arabic translation that the West learned of Greek medicine, including the works of Galen and Hippocrates. Of equal, if not of greater influence in Western Europe were systematic and comprehensive works such as Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, which were translated into Latin and then disseminated in manuscripts and printed throughout Europe. During the 15th and 16th centuries alone, the Canon of Medicine of Avicenna was published more than 35 times in Europe. Equally, Arabic-speaking Muslim communities survived in Sicily for more than 2 centuries after the Norman conquest. Muslims had ruled Sicily for almost 2 centuries until the 11th century, and there is a debate as to whether they introduced spaghetti or it was the Italians, right? And so we will leave it for them to. I say, well, if it's only about spaghetti, it's fine. As long as they did not introduce the mafia system, then that's fine. So Muslims contributed to Sicily, and their contribution to Sicily, in fact, was monumental in science, in engineering, in cuisine, and so forth. What is interesting is once Sicily was conquered again by non-Muslims, in this case the Normans, Muslim culture and scientific preeminence was well understood by the Normans, and they acknowledged this in every single respect. In fact, the renowned historian Hitti explains under the Normans occurred the affluence of an interesting Christian Islamic culture. Under the Normans, their genius attained full fruition in a rich outburst of Arab Norman art and culture. And the luster of Muslim civilization was rather heightened than tarnished by the Norman conquest. Again, the shared narrative of interconnectedness was not limited to Islam and the West, but more broadly, the East and the West. In fact, in his book, The Eastern Origins of Western Civilizations, John Hobson argues, or he challenges, the ethnocentric bias of mainstream accounts of the rise of the West that assumes that since ancient Greek times, Europeans have pioneered their own development and that the East has been a passive bystander in the story of progressive world history. Hobson compellingly argues that each major developmental turning point in Europe was in fact informed in large part by the assimilation of Eastern inventions, ideas, technologies, institutions, which through Oriental globalization diffused from the more advanced East across the Eastern-led global economy between the year 500 and 1800. The translation movements, my friends, that allowed for a massive volume of data to flood Europe would have an impact that went beyond the European Renaissance and helped Europe's scientific revolution. It is true that Europe eventually succeeded in taking these Eastern ideas further, but without the original Eastern ideas in the first place, they would have been little or nothing to take further. It should also be noted that the European Renaissance owes a debt, not just to the Muslims, Indians and Chinese, but also, as Boyce argues, to black Africans. In fact, the original Greek text passed into the Islamic world through what is known today as the Middle East. Of course, it wasn't known as the Middle East, it was the Levant, but also diffused to Africa, especially Alexandria and Cairo. And as he says, Black Sudan had long been a culture of learning and teaching, much of which was transmitted back to Europe. My friends, let's come back closer to us. The story of Muslims and our brothers and sisters, the owners of this land, the Aborigines and the Torres Strait Islanders. Their story also speaks beautifully about this idea of interconnectedness. The earliest contact with Muslims in Australia were between the Aboriginal people of northern Australia and fishermen from Makassar, southern Sulawesi in Indonesia. The Makassans came to Australian waters near Arnhem Land and the Kimberley coast in search for tripang, a type of a sea cucumber, which the Makassans exported to the Chinese markets. This contact lasted for centuries, with some records in Sulawesi history showing that fishermen had visited northern Australia regularly since the 1600s. And I always say to the young Australian Muslims when I speak to them about issues to do with identity, because our young Australian Muslims are suffering from an identity crisis because of the onslaught on their identity and culture and faith that they see constantly. And I say to them, denying your Australianness is to deny a long-standing historical presence of Islam and Muslims in this nation. We cannot deny, and I say to them, impress upon them, you must never deny your Australianness as Muslims. As a result, the regular contact had a deep impact on both the culture and language of indigenous people and Makassans. In fact, a friend of ours, anthropologist Regina Ganter, explains that this contact, much predating European interest in the Australian continent, was not just accidental, nor occasional, but left profound imprints on the culture and languages of the far north shores. And other anthropologists like Ian McIntosh also speaks of the profound impact of this contact, as a result of which aspects of Islam were creatively adapted by Aborigines. Muslim contacts with members of the Aboriginal communities were not merely ancient events. There are many contemporary incidents of further continuing contact, although in a different form. Research by Peter Stevenson examines how recent indigenous converts to Islam are reconnecting and reaffirming their indigenous identity through their acceptance of Islam. In fact, some converts are reconnecting with their roots and heritage, rediscovering their aboriginality through Muslim heritage. They have explained to researchers that there are many aspects of Islam and indigenous culture that mirror each other or overlap, such as keeping sacred places, eating communally, sharing together, rites of circumcision, and the passing into adulthood and kinship relations, to name a few. Many converts, in fact, have found that it is easy for them to blend their indigenous culture with Islam, having little or no conflict between the two. In fact, we can learn so much about interconnectedness from our brothers and sisters of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, whose song lines speak of interconnectedness of the land and its people, and their duty to uphold the obligations of passing the song in perfect form to the next generation. But also we must not forget the Camel Ears. Arriving in Australia in the mid-1850s, the Camel Ears were instrumental in the exploration of the Australian interior, and along with their camels became the backbone of the Australian economy. Among the first Camel Ears were those arrived in 1860 for the Burke and Wills expedition, which were the first to cross the continent from south to north. And of course, they made their first establishment and foundation here in South Australia, in Adelaide, where they built the oldest mosque that stands in the center of the city. My friends, these historical examples demonstrate the level of interconnectedness between two seemingly opposing civilizations, the Western and the Islamic. Yet this is not the narrative that you often hear about Islam, Muslims, and their relationship with the West. The narrative that you usually hear, as David mentioned earlier, about Islam and Muslims goes like this. Islam and Muslims are culturally incompatible with the West. Muslim immigrants are seen as potential political threat to national security. Islam stands in opposition to secular modernity. Islam is now at war with the West, and elements of Islam have an agenda hostile not only to Australia's values, but also to the basic tenets of Western civilization. And I don't know if I love it or I hate it when I hear some of our politicians or journalists talk about that our values, Muslim values, are not compatible with your values, Western values. And I would like to always ask them, what values are you talking about? In many cases, Australian mass media stereotype Muslims as alien, foreign, other, incompatible with democracy and Western values. Equally, and that is important, extremist groups from among Muslims, such as ISIL and Boko Haram, almost say the same thing. They tell us that the West is at war with Islam. Democracy is incompatible with Islam. The West is an abode of war, and the West hate Muslims. I believe that extremists on both sides are selective with what Islamic ideals they choose to portray to the public. And they often fail to look at context, and in fact, they fail to understand history. And they misinterpret the sacred tradition to support their arguments. People from both extremes visualize Islam as being unable to connect with the West, rejecting its historical, social, and political context. This narrative is false and destructive. In fact, Islam has always been culturally neutral. And that is something I teach my students. We started a course called Applied Islam some time ago, both Dylan Chown and I, because we found there is a gap, and young Australian Muslims are missing that ingredient. They want somebody to talk to them about how to contextualize Islam, how to make Islam relevant to their lives. And so we started this program called Applied Islam, in which we teach them that Islam is culturally neutral, meaning it accepts anything from any culture that is good, useful, and merely harmless. And we teach them about the idea of positive identity. How can we create in ourselves, but also in young people, the very idea of positive identity? And positive identity can perhaps be beautifully summarized by a prophetic saying where the Prophet Muhammad said, wisdom is the lost beast of a believer. Wherever he or she finds it, they grab it. Wisdom is the lost beast. So regardless of where wisdom comes from, and one scholar that I met recently, he gave a nice example. He said, imagine if an engagement ring that you gave to your wife was lost, and then after some time somebody found it. Somebody comes to her and says, I found your ring. And will she now take this ring and be grateful to this person who gave her the ring, or now reject the ring because he doesn't look like her, he doesn't believe in her values? It'll be insane to do so, right? And so wisdom is the lost property of a believer, or of wherever he or she finds it, they grab it. And so what the Islamic civilization did for centuries, it harmonized indigenous forms of cultural expression with the universal norms of its sacred law. It struck a balance between temporal beauty and ageless truth, and fanned a brilliant peacock's tail of unity in diversity from the heart of China to the shores of the Atlantic. And this is what Umar Farooq Abdullah tells us. He further says the religion became not only functional and familiar at the local level, but dynamically engaging, fostering stable indigenous Muslim identities and allowing Muslims to put down deep roots and making lasting contributions wherever they went. Recognition of the diversity of humankind and their need to know one another is entrenched in Islamic scripture. And that is why when we see people acting in the name of Islam who ignore and refuse to accept this basic assumption of Islam, the beauty in diversity, we're astounded. Because the very scripture of Islam, the Quran, beautifully exemplifies this point when the Quran says, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ خَبِيرٌ. People, this is what the verse says, people. Ya ayyuhan nas. Whenever the Quran says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, it's not addressing Muslims. There are certain places in the Quran where it addresses believers directly. But in many instances, it's addressing people. So it says, O people, we created you from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes. Why? So that you may get to know one another. So that you may get to know one another. And part of the science of the Quran is to understand what is known the asbab al-nuzul, the reason for revelation. Why was this verse revealed? What was the context? What was the incident? And the story is quite fascinating. One of the freed slaves was a man known Bilal. Bilal was an Abyssinian, and as they used to describe them he was an Abyssinian, a black African slave who was emancipated by the Prophet himself and his companion. And then after years, when Prophet Muhammad went victorious to Mecca and reconquered Mecca, he asked the Abyssinian man to climb the house of God, the Kaaba, and call for the prayer. Some of the chiefs of the most influential tribe of Mecca, known as Quraysh, were absolutely wonderstruck. How could Muhammad ask this Abyssinian man to climb with his bare feet the house of God and call for the prayer? And they reviled him, they despised him because of his color. And this is why this revelation was revealed. And that is why at that point of time also the Prophet said, he says, Ya ayyuhan nas, again he says, O people, ala inna rabbakum wahid, wa inna abakum wahid, ala la fadla li'arabiyyin ala ajamiyyin, wala li'ajamiyyin ala arabiyyin, wala li'ahmarin ala aswad. He said, O people, your God is one and your Father is one. There is no preference of white over black or black over white, of Arab over a non-Arab or a non-Arab over an Arab. All of you are equal. Commenting on this, a Mujahid said, it was through the systematic incorporation of the concept of mutual humanity, recognition of other religions into belief structures, laws and values that explains why Islamic societies from the start were racially diverse, multi-ethnic, and open to other faith communities. Whether it is in Medina, Baghdad, Andalus, Egypt, Timbuktu, Jerusalem, Istanbul, Bukhara, or Delhi, one finds people of different races and religions living and working comfortably with each other by and large. Rumi, you must have heard about Rumi by now. Rumi is one of the greatest, well, he has sold millions of copies. Rumi is a Persian poet and Sufi master born in the year 807. That's a few centuries ago, and millions of fans around the world now follow him. In his poetry is very much a favorite, especially in the United States of America, because he and many others among the poets, they always depicted the Muslim world and the neighborhood in the Muslim world as a large cosmopolitan culture in which the other are regular participants as neighbors, scholars, traders, and partners. My friends, coexistence is strength. Societies, nations, and civilizations that harness the beauty of diversity and multiculturalism have been able to progress in leaps and bounds. It is unfortunate, however, that there are people who see multiculturalism and the coexistence between people of diverse faith traditions and backgrounds as a weakness and not a strength. It shows strength to be able to accommodate disagreement and dissension, to be able to encompass various outlooks, social tendencies, and aspirations while not having any group's vested interest spiral into discord or civil strife. Strength is not about imposing one particular view by force, but it is being able to accept the other despite the difference that we have. Extremists on either side don't understand this, and they try to decontextualize our understanding of the tradition. And one of these most decontextualized and misunderstood concepts by both extremists is the very concept of jihad. Don't get scared. I'm not gonna. So jihad is one of those concepts which is deeply misunderstood by both extremists. And so on one hand, often the media portrays those who are terrorists and war criminals who kill innocent people, who kill civilians and bystanders as jihadis. To us, this is an insult. It is a massive insult because that's not how we understand jihad to be. Jihad has multiple meanings, the very least of those meanings is to be making a struggle, to strive to attain a noble end. And so I often say, here I am standing before you without guns and swords. I am performing jihad. It is a struggle. It is to strive to attain a noble end. And yes, at the very end of this type of jihad is military confrontation, which is heavily regulated. And so when some in the name of Islam or in the name of political interest inform us that it is okay to kill innocent people in the name of jihad, we say to them, it is not okay. That is totally forbidden. And Muslims throughout the ages have understood that the killing of innocent people is totally, totally prohibited. In fact, this is premised on many, many teachings of Islam. The renowned hadith of the Prophet says, "Stop, O people, that I may give you 10 rules for your guidance in the battlefield. Do not commit treachery or deviate from the right path. You must not mutilate dead bodies. Neither kill a child, nor a woman, nor an aged man. Bring no harm to the trees, nor burn them with fire, especially those which are fruitful. Slay not any of the enemy's flock, save for your food. You are likely to pass by the people of the scriptures, the Christians and the Jews, who have devoted their lives to monastic service. Leave them alone." This is not what terrorists do. This is not what extremists do. And commenting on this, the 13th century scholar and jurist and a hadith master, he said the nature of the prohibition of killing innocent people is so specific and well defined that there can be no legal justification, nor can there be a legitimate excuse from an Islamic legal perspective for circumventing this convention of war by targeting non-combatants or civilians whatsoever. and that the Sharia ruling of killing innocent people and bystanders, men and women and children, is not only prohibited by both Sunni and Shia, but also is a major sin and contravenes one of the principal commandments of our way of life. Extremists function outside the agreed upon confines of discourse, or Islam in this case. And so people often ask me, why hasn't, in fact, one of the journalists who sent me a text this morning or an email says, can you comment on why there isn't a fatwa against ISIS? A fatwa is a legal opinion that is given by scholars for a certain legal situation. That's interesting. We're always asked the same question. You know how many hundreds of, and in fact thousands of Muslim scholars and leaders have issued a verdict or an opinion against ISIS? And one of these letters, it was called an open letter to Baghdadi. Baghdadi is the leader of ISIL, which was signed by hundreds of Muslim scholars and leaders. And the summary of this open letter to Baghdadi says that among the agreed upon points is, it is prohibited in Islam to kill the innocent. It is forbidden in Islam to kill emissaries, ambassadors, and diplomats. Hence, it is forbidden to kill journalists and aid workers. Jihad in Islam is defensive war. It is not permissible without the right cause, the right purpose, and without the right rule of conduct. It is forbidden in Islam to declare people non-Muslim unless he or she openly declares this belief. It is forbidden in Islam to harm or mistreat in any way Christians or any of the people of the scriptures, including Jewish. And when the Islamic Empire expanded, they included in the definition of the people of the scriptures Hindus and Buddhists, believe it or not. And they also said the reintroduction of slavery is forbidden in Islam. And that's what ISIL does. They have reintroduced slavery. Slavery was abolished by universal consensus in the Islamic world some time ago. Recently, 70,000 Indian Muslim clerics issued a fatwa against ISIS, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other group terrorists. And we are still asked, why don't you give a fatwa against ISIS, right? Just to finish off, we need to advocate living in a world where interconnectedness is important now more than ever for humanity. For us, we need to connect with respect, integrity, honor, and dignity. Historically, this has been achieved at various times and places. We need to draw on those lessons and not succumb to a fear-mongering rhetoric that will destroy the very fabric of our societies. Through education, genuine engagement, and an appreciation of the value and worth of the other, we can create a cohesive society. And I believe that Australia can lead the world in this regard. We have all the right ingredients to do so. And that is why we are able to establish something like the Center for Islamic Thought and Education in a nation like Australia. And I'm very, very proud of that. The Center for Islamic Thought and Education is an initiative of many people, and I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the University of South Australia, to its Vice-Chancellor, to the Vice-Chancellor, to certainly the DVC and the PVC, and all the other Cs that are, you know, I saw the VC and the DVC and the PVC and everybody else who was involved in the process, so thank you so much. And all those people who don't want to be named tonight for their contribution. Through the Center for Islamic Thought and Education, we want to not only undertake academic research, that is important, absolutely important. We want to be able to study the Muslim community, but not as a subject inscribed by otherness. We are part of the community. We understand their aspirations, their concerns, their woes, their worries. We laugh when they laugh, we cry when they cry. We participate in their functions, and we want to be connected to the community. And I always say to myself and my staff, and the PhD students, in fact, if you are doing this research without the final vision of empowering community and communities, then you're in the wrong business. It is at the heart of our philosophy that we will utilize the talent and the skills and the knowledge that we have to engage genuinely and in a grounded manner. And I think in this way, I say we are somehow fortunate that we have spent the last 2 decades plus more since 9/11, the tragic events of 9/11, when our mosque was burnt down in Brisbane, the first mosque in the world to be burned down in the world was our mosque in Brisbane after 9/11. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Right, totally burnt down. And I want to share this story with you quickly. When the mosque was burnt down, everything in the mosque was burnt. It was destroyed except one page from a book of hadith. Hadith is the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, which is, hadith is a secondary source of Islamic legislation. And there was one page that survived, and it was burnt all around it. And the page said in Arabic, and for those who know Arabic, it says, لَيْسَ الشَّدِيدُ بِالسُّرْعَةِ إِنَّمَا الشَّدِيدُ الَّذِي يَمْلِكُ نَفْسَهُ عِنْدَ الْغَضَبِ. It's amazing. It says, a strong person is not one who wrestles and defeats others, but one who controls himself or herself in times of anger. That was the only surviving text when the mosque was burned. And that was, for us, it was a divine message. And so we began a strategy, a building of bridges of understanding between people. And I believe that it is not sufficient to indulge in engagement simply based on emotions and high feelings, but it's also we need to be grounded. And so what we have done and what we will do is actually examine some of the problems that affect the Australian Muslim community and their relation with the others, with the wider community. So we're not shy, for example, to examine domestic violence in the Australian Muslim community. Dr. Nada Ibrahim is the only expert in Australia who has actually examined the question of domestic violence or intimate partner violence within the Australian Muslim community. We want to understand these problems, but more importantly, provide sustainable solutions that are embedded or built on empirical research and vigorous or rigorous academic methods that are cognizant of the Australian Muslim community and is aware of the Australian context. And that is, I think, where perhaps our strength lies. And so we are extremely excited to be part of the University of South Australia, and I see it as a visionary school, visionary university, and the School of Education. People ask us, have you settled? We have settled most wonderfully. We are excited. The School of Education, Professor Hobson and his colleagues have made us feel extremely welcome. Adelaide is a beautiful city. We love it and its people. And guess what? We all are living walking distance from McGill campus. So, which is fantastic. My friends, we will engage actively with the wider Australian community. We want to engage. In fact, in the last 2 weeks, we have done so many meetings. I don't think we've done so many meetings as we have done internally and externally. We've met with all the gatekeepers of the community, the stakeholders, young and old, men and women, because we believe in engagement and, importantly, empowerment of communities. And so, therefore, I want to end by thanking you all and for helping us make this a reality. And finally, in the spirit of the many nations and language groups of Australia's First Peoples and the wave of migrants since then, I would like to welcome you to the Centre of Islamic Thought and Education. Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have time for a few questions. So, Mohammed, if you could join me here. There's no rest tonight. An inaugural lecture demands your full attention. So we have some roving mics. If you want to ask a question, the first hand gets the first question in the traditional sense. So who wants to ask a question?
All right, no questions.
I think you're well able to field questions.
Okay. Thank you. I think I answered all the questions.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation tonight. I'm Sarah Hanson-Young, Green Senator here in South Australia. I think we're entering a really interesting part of this debate being seen for all in the next Parliament. We resume in 2 weeks' time when 4 members of the Parliament, members of the One Nation Party, are going to be taking their seats. They are elected on the basis of promoting the myths that you've spoken about tonight, and perpetuating the negative stereotypes. What would you like those of us as elected members from this state and across the country, how would you like us to engage with those 4 people in particular about how we promote connectivity, cooperation, and the positiveness of multiculturalism?
Thank you. I think it's always important to engage with anybody with civility and decorum, and to also have to have wisdom in the way we engage with people. We are very troubled by the fact that such representatives made it, but we also respect the very processes of democracy in this nation. And I guess we, as a community, we would continue to engage, and we have asked, in fact, to meet. I have asked publicly to see if I could meet with Pauline Hanson herself to have a discussion. But not only she refused to attend a halal meal, but also she refuses to attend our meetings. So I guess not only for yourself as a member of parliament, but also for every conscientious Australian. Our message is this, that whenever anybody from any spectrum raises or portrays racist and divisive agendas, we should speak out. We should not be silent. But when we speak out, we should speak out with civility, and we should speak out with nobility. I always say we must be firm but polite. And so our request to yourself is one, actually also, with due respect, you also need to engage with the Australian Muslim community. And this engagement should not be superficial. Please excuse me for saying this, but I must, that often we find our engagement with government is tick the box type. And it is not deep, it is often superficial. I dare not say this about this state because I'm new here and I cannot comment on this state, but I know this has been the case elsewhere. So at the very least, or it is extremely important to engage with the Islamic community on all levels, its leadership, religious and otherwise, the young and the women and the old and so forth. And also to begin to not only speak to representatives of the One Nation, but all other also members of Parliament and the Senate, that it is extremely important at this stage to engage genuinely with the Australian Muslim community and to see how we can empower them to be able to tackle and handle some of these rather difficult circumstances and times that they are facing, especially the young people of the Australian Muslim community. We really are in a very difficult situation, and all of us need to be working together to make sure that they pass through this crucial period successfully and help them to feel that they belong to this country and help them feel that they are part of this nation. Thank you.
I'm going to, there we go. Yeah, we'll get you, Mike. Otherwise the podcast won't hear you. Yeah?
Professor, my name is Sivam, and I've got a question for you from the lecture. You said, from the perspective of interconnectedness, as far as the house of God is concerned, from Islamic perspective, what sort of way are they leading, in this respect?
Just put your...
Yeah, in that respect.
Sorry, what's that? Sorry, I didn't understand.
All right.
I'm sorry.
From a perspective of interconnectedness,
yes,
right? You mentioned House of God,
yes,
Saudi Arabia, for example.
Yes.
How do they kind of lead the way in interconnectedness?
How can we?
How do they
lead the way, or at least in a current?
Oh, the house of God or worship. If I understood you correctly, the places of worship, I think, play a very, very crucial role in trying to advocate the idea of interconnectedness. Whether we are speaking about a mosque, a synagogue, or a church, or a temple. And I always say this when I speak in multi-faith or interfaith gatherings to religious leaders. we have a huge responsibility. The onus of proof is on the shoulders of religious leaders also to be utilizing their pulpits, their places of worship, to advocate the idea of interconnectedness and appreciation, respect, and acceptance of the other. Religion can play a substantially powerful role in trying to bring people together, but also it can play a substantially powerful role in dividing people. And I think not only the Muslim leaders, the imams of the mosques, but equally those of the churches and the synagogues and elsewhere need to take this moral responsibility and advocate the very idea of inclusiveness, the very idea of multiculturalism and interconnectedness, and speak out indeed against any form of racism and any form that attempts to exclude the other from the discourse.
We have time for one last question.
So I've got the microphone, I might hog it for a little while. One's more a comment and the other one's a question. I think we talked about young Muslims growing up here, and I think one of the challenges always is going to be that maybe they don't see themselves as us and them, that they are both us and them. And I think that's an issue not so much for them, but more so for the wider community, because if that discourse keeps creating that division between us and them, I think we talked about bridges of understanding, then for them to feel that sense of connection and feel Australian enough is always going to be harder to overcome. So I think, you know, that divisiveness is there in the discourse itself when we talk about us and them, when people don't see themselves as this or that, but as they are. The question was more around, we talked about a golden era of Islam, and I was just wondering if there's ever a risk in the emphasis on that era of something so old that it can almost come across as Islam is somehow stuck, that it's past its best. And I think that calling it a golden era can almost, has that connotation.
Yes. You notice I didn't call it the golden era. No, that's fine. I mean, but there is it's a big story. So when was the golden era? Did it decline? Did it not decline? That's a long lecture. You don't want to sit here for another hour, right? So, but look, I guess the point is that it's important to understand this idea of interconnectedness, and we can learn from history quite a bit. And I think I found from my reading of extremist discourses that often they actually fail to understand the importance of history and this historical interconnectedness. I even find it among young Australian Muslims, or young people generally, a failure to understand history, and especially the very positive narrative about history. It somewhat decontextualizes them. They operate essentially in a vacuum that does not see that people as connected. And it's important for me to speak about this interconnectedness and link it not only to the Greeks, but to the Islamic civilization, to the Indian. I don't see it as outdated, but rather as it's a continuing story, and it will never end. But regarding the young people, you're absolutely right. I think it's extremely important that we engage with them in a wholesome way and try to understand their feelings and aspirations and work with them and allow them to be partners in any solution that we propose, government or otherwise. And otherwise, we will continue to have this problem with the young people.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to invite the patron of the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre, a former Prime Minister and the most electorally successful Labour leader in Australia's history, Mr. Bob Hawke, to give a vote of thanks.
Thank you. I just heard you talking about you may or may not have had a golden era. The Jews had their golden era. That didn't go over very well, did it? Vice-Chancellor, Chancellor, Minister, Senator, dear friends one and all. I didn't, but if anyone did need any confirmation of the great good fortune of the University of South Australia and its important constituent, the Hawke Centre, acquiring the services of Professor Abdullah, the answer has tonight been provided in spades. Thank you so much, Professor. I want to thank you for the lucidity and the cogency with which you demolished so many of the myths, the misunderstandings, the lies with which so many of our Muslim friends and Islamic communities have been harnessed in these difficult, trying and indeed dangerous times. Thank you indeed for the way in which you did that, the dispassionate, lucid, cogent way in which you did it. You commenced, understandably, with a reference to the early magnificent contributions of the Abbasid Caliphate. And it's interesting, just reading recently, it's also the starting point in this recent book, which no doubt you've read, by Shadi Hamid, Islamic Exceptionalism. But I couldn't help but notice, the same point he made very early in his book. This is what he said. The Abbasid Caliphate was one of the most successful empires the world had ever seen. From the 8th to the 13th centuries, the empire prospered with unprecedented advancements in science, medicine, and philosophy. Students from Europe flocked to Muslim universities, hoping to study with the world's greatest doctors, thinkers, and theologians. Now, if you listen to so many people today, they would find that difficult to believe, but that was the great truth of the time. And I was very interested to see that you began your remarks earlier by reference to that truly outstanding period. It was, objectively a remarkable period. In expressing my appreciation to you, I want to put it in the context that I think many of you here have heard me mention on a previous occasion. But it's thoroughly appropriate that what you have to say, I think, should be put in this context. I have said, and I repeat because I believe it foundationally, that we live in a unique period of history. This is the first time in all of human history where we've had the opportunity either to lift the standard and quality of life of all mankind, or on the other hand, destroy life as we know it on this planet. These are not exaggerated words. This is the truth. And the fact is, of course, that one of the most significant determining factor in determining which of those awesome paths we go down will be whether we have the good sense, the humanity, the spirit, to do the sorts of things that you're talking about, the things that you're working to achieve. To get out of the minds of men and women these things that I refer to as the myths, the misrepresentation, the lies, so that we can truly understand that it is in togetherness, in mutual respect, in mutual humanity, that we are most likely to ensure that we take the first of those paths and not the second. And so I want to say to you that I think there could be very little that one could think of could be more important to be doing in the academic world than you and your colleagues are doing, because we want every single contribution that we can possibly get to move towards this context of togetherness, of harmony, and working together. And so I congratulate you and your colleagues for that work you're doing here in the academic environment of this great university. And I want to say, when I say you're doing this work in this academic environment, one of the things that I'm sure every member of this audience found inspiring in what you said was that you're not just a bloody academic. You have the concept of bringing your academic expertise into the community to make a reality of it, and not just some basis of getting a PhD or something like that. You are a practical man, your colleagues are practical people, and I appreciate that. I can't tell you how proud I am personally of having the association that I do with you through the Hawke Centre, and I simply conclude again by saying you cannot, never should, underestimate the importance of what you are about and what your colleagues are about. And I know I speak for everyone in this hall when I say I wish you and your staff and the Centre for Islamic Thought and Education all the very best into the future.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I should point out, and I want to thank Bob for that vote of thanks, because Bob's work in championing Muslim, non-Muslim understanding in this institution goes back over many years, long before I got here. And Bob and I had a very long talk about Muslim, non-Muslim understanding and the legacy of the centre that we have in that domain, and the role in which the Centre for Islamic Thought and Education will play in furthering that. And Bob's engagement here tonight is testimony to how much he's driven this personally. I also want to thank Charlie Shaheen and Nick Balkus and Miriam Silva, who are local leaders who drove this as well. And I want to welcome Professor Mohammed Abdallah and his entire team to the University of South Australia. And I know that they will go on to do immeasurably good work in driving interconnectedness across all community. As I mentioned earlier, tonight's lecture was recorded and will be podcasted soon on the Hawke Centre website, so you can revisit the lecture and share it with those who were not here and unable to share with it tonight. Thank you all for coming here. I wish you a safe journey home, and we'll see you at our next event. Thank you.